Amish.
So, good afternoon and welcome to the Asset Colloquium. As most of you know what ASSET stands for, but for those of you joining for the first time, ASSET started in 1983, and in initial avatar it was known as Instrumentation and Engineering Colloquium. Later it has expanded its horizons, and today we have a wide, the talks covering a very broad area from science, engineering, and technology. And today's talk is also something special because this week we are celebrating 40 years of ASSET, and we have series of very interesting talks. Today's, of course, the talks has a very interesting title, The Magic of Comics. And tomorrow also we have a special ASSET colloquium by Professor Amit Roy on one of the women physicists who discovered fission but remained largely in the oblivion. Didn't get the proper, missed the Nobel Prize for that. So we'll hear more about it tomorrow. So now I invite Professor Prahlad to introduce today's speaker.
Thanks, Vandana. It's a delight to you all. It's a special delight to invite Nikhil Gulati. So the connection. So how I got to know Nikhil is quite an interesting thing. So the pandemic was going on. There was I realized during the pandemic that science communication in general is very bad in India. We need to do first to do it, and I was trying of various parts of it. And just around that time, I saw these reviews in the Hindu, the Live Mint on this book, The People of Indus. So I just happened to buy it by chance. Really enjoyed the book to the extent that I purchased 6 to 7 copies of it for various nieces and nephews of mine. And given that I purchase it so often, I thought I should reach out to the author and say hi to him and said, I really enjoyed reading your book. So that sometime last year was when I wrote to one of the reviewers in the Hindu or the Live Mint and asked to get Nikhil's contact info, wrote to Nikhil and found out Nikhil's contact and wrote to him, and he was nice enough to respond immediately, and we got chatting for a while. And then realized that he would be coming to Bombay for India Comic Festival in Bombay, which was over the weekend. So I thought it would be a great idea to have Nikhil talk to us about. So Nikhil is an illustrator and graphic novelist. His current novel is The People of the Indus, based on the Indus Valley civilization. Talk to us. But his journey to a graphic novelist it took quite a while before him. He started off like several of us, as a scientist and an engineering background. In fact, I realized talking to him that Nikhil, myself, and Rahul Vaze all had an overlap in the University of Austin at Texas more than 12 years ago. We were all doing various engineering. This one, Rahul was electrical engineering. Nikhil and I were in the computer science department at that point of time. I didn't know, but Rahul and Nikhil happened to be good friends. They're cricket buddies from then. Nikhil then went on to pursue an MBA, but then he felt he wanted to do something different, something which goes back to his childhood roots. So in his own words, he decided to take the brush and pen and started off. His first book was a historical narrative on the rise and fall of the Golconda Fort in Hyderabad. And then his next book is about the people of the Indus. He'll be talking about this book in specific and more generally about communicating science through the medium of comics. Nikhil, over to you.
Can you guys hear me? Oh yeah, cool.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Hello, is this better? Volume's fine? Okay. Okay. Yeah, thanks Prahlad for inviting me. And thanks all of you guys for coming here. This might be a little different maybe from what you are used to hearing over here. So like he said, I used to do science. I mean, I used to be interested in science long time back, and I was an engineer first. But then through some things that happened, I eventually switched to comics. I started making comics. And I've been working on this history topic mostly for the last few years, but I've done a few comics on science. So I'm going to talk to you guys today about why I think comics is a great medium to communicate science, as well as other topics, but specifically science to the wider audience. Oh, yeah. So the broad outline of this talk is going to be, I'm going to talk about what exactly is comics and what it isn't. I'm going to talk about my own personal experience using comics to tell history. Then we'll talk about science, how I've tried to use comics to tell science. And then there's going to be a very brief 5-minute, very introductory tutorial on how to make comics, or at least the process. I would like to show you guys what the process is. So starting with what is comics. Generally, the first thing that comes to mind when people mention comics is stuff like that, right? It's superheroes, and it's some visuals, it's some speech bubbles, or sometimes it's stuff like this. Generally, it is either superheroes or some kiddie stories is what comes to mind when you think of comics. But I personally feel that comics go way back, like really way back. We've actually used this and similar art forms for a very, very long time. This is artwork from these caves in France. And these paintings, like the whole cave is full of paintings. And I think that artworks like this were used to tell stories. So it was a combination of visuals and words, which basically is what comics is. These are examples. The second photo is from Bhimbetka in India. These are also cave paintings, at least 15,000 years old. The French ones are around 35,000 years old, and were potentially narrative devices as well. Again, from Egypt, we see stuff like this, where there's a series of images and some text, which is basically what comics is. This is from the Ajanta caves. These are paintings. And again, I feel these are whole entire narrative scenes where stories are captured by the whole scene. And there's a lot going on. And potentially there were people who were standing next to the painting, pointing at things and telling people what is going on and telling a story. This is a tapestry from Europe. And it actually, it is also a series of images with text. And it runs, I don't know, several dozens of feet at least. So it is practically a comic. Closer to home in India, there are these art forms, the Pattachitra and the Cherial paintings, where it's basically again a series of images. And I've seen this in Hyderabad where you have these scrolls. So you keep scrolling at the top and unscrolling at the bottom. And these artworks keep coming out, and there's a guy standing with a stick literally and telling you what's going on. He's generally singing it. And sometimes there's also a drummer next to him or some musician that is giving background track. So, and they tell these stories over hours and hours and hours. So I feel that this idea of comics goes way back. And we've been using this form of communication for a long, long time. In more modern times, comics, of course, has taken a particular form, especially with speech bubbles and stuff. And even more, like even after these comics became associated with superhero stories, people in the last few decades have tried to do new things. So for example, this one is from a graphic novel called Mouse, which is about the Jewish Holocaust. And it's about a particular family in Poland, a Jewish family in Poland that goes through it. So it's a memoir. It's the author is interviewing his father, and the father is telling about what happened to his family, and he's drawn it all out. And comics have started to tackle different themes and different stories. This is artwork by Robert Crumb. This is Will Eisner. Again, very different kinds of stories that people started doing in the last few decades. And some even try to do science. This is a famous one. I don't know if you guys have seen it. For those of you who haven't, you should check it out. So it's called Logic Comics. It's a graphic novel that's basically a biography of Bertrand Russell, but it also gets into his mathematics and his philosophy, and along with his life. So it's a great way. Like, this was my introduction to Bertrand Russell and his ideas. So I'll talk a little bit about what is the power of comics. Why I like this medium. So the most obvious, of course, is that it's a visual medium. So instead of telling you things, instead of describing things, I can just show them to you. So if I'm saying that the Japanese troops entered Korea, I can actually, if I show it to you, it somehow becomes a little more real. You know, there's a lot more detail to that image of these troops walking in through this city gates as just a sentence might do. So the first thing is, of course, that it's a visual medium. The second is that because it is a hand-drawn medium, it becomes very expressive. Like, literally, I don't have to tell you what these two guys are feeling. You can probably just look at it and kind of get a sense for what these two are feeling. So that the guy on the right looks a bit nervous. The guy on the left seems a little more confident, and it seems to be leading the other one through this door. So because it's hand-drawn, it can be very expressive. And the third is, this is what I call the magic of comics. The thing that sets comics apart from other mediums is that it is a sequential medium. So the images appear in a sequence. And because they appear in a sequence, I think there's a sense of movement and time and a rhythm and space that starts happening in the reader's mind as we look at these drawings in a sequence. And this, to me, is what makes comics really unique, and which is why I love this medium, and which is why I chose to tell stories through this medium. By the way, if you guys want to interrupt at any point and ask, you can. We'll also leave some time at the end for questions, but you feel free to interrupt and ask. So this is why I chose comics as my medium. I was doing other stuff before, techie stuff. I was a software designer for a while. But at some point, the kinds of jobs I was doing were just not inspiring me. So I decided to switch. And I kind of went back to my childhood interests. And I thought, okay, what is it that nobody has ever told me to do that I just did for my own sake? And illustration, drawing, stories were some of the things that came up amongst several others. But this was one of the things that came up. So when I switched to making comics, I was looking for topics. I was looking for things that I wanted to tell through comics. And history was one of my passions. So I thought, okay, not so many people have done it before. Let me try that. It'll be something new. So I started working on the first graphic novel, which I think Prahlad mentioned. It's basically the story of Golconda, the fort in Hyderabad. You guys probably have heard of it. And once I had finished that, I took on, so that one, the first one was a bit shorter. It was about 60 pages. Once I was done with that, I felt a little more ambitious, and I decided to take on a full-length project, and that was The People of the Indus. It's a book that came out just 3-4 months back. I have a few copies here if you guys are interested. So I'll talk about these two a little bit, and then I'll get into science. So my idea with Golconda was that I just wanted almost like a tour of the fort. It's literally one person taking you around the fort and talking about it. So I wanted to show what the fort looks like today. And as I walk through the fort, I'm telling what was going on here. Why did they build this? What was the whole thing that was happening at this place 500 years back when this fort was built? So yeah, so I wanted to give this kind of a tour, and my idea was that I wanted to show all the beautiful spots, all the spots that I liked and I just wanted a reason to illustrate them and show it to you. But at the same time, be talking about what was happening. So these are again some of the ruins. This was the palace area. But also something I could do with comics is I could show you things. I could show you artifacts. Like I don't just have to talk about them. I don't have to describe them. So Kohinoor, the diamond comes from Golconda. And whenever people have mentioned Kohinoor, I never knew what it looked like. So in a comic, I could actually just show it. And instead of saying how big it is, so many centimeters long or whatever, I could literally just put a 5 rupee coin next to it. And you kind of get a sense for how big it is. Kohinoor is the one on the left, by the way, bottom left. The other two are other diamonds that also came from Golconda. So this kind of thing, I always felt I could do with comics. And history to me was always visual. I always felt, don't tell me about Takshila or something, just show it to me. At least show me the ruins. If you can't show me what it looked like 3,000 years back, just at least show me the ruins. If you're going to talk about the sculptures that have been found there, just show them to me. Show me how big they are or what they look like. So this kind of stuff I could do with comics. When I wanted to tell history, I could do this in comics. And I could show maps, to show relationships, to show how people were moving and stuff like that. And finally, I could do things like this. So this is again one of the palace areas in Golconda. This is what it looks like today. And so this appears on one page. And when you flip the page on the other side, I can recreate the same thing. So if you're walking around the fort with this comic book in hand, you could potentially look at how these same spots used to look like. So this kind of thing seemed fun to me, and I wanted to do this in comics. This is another example. So there's a street here. You can see this how it looks today. These are houses and shops and stuff. But back in the day, it actually used to be a diamond market. So I wanted to kind of recreate that and kind of get a feel for what it might have looked like back in the day. Because when I'm walking around in the ruins and the forts, this is what I'm doing. I'm standing there and imagining, okay, if I was here, if I'm standing in this spot 500 years back, what would I be feeling? What would I be seeing? I can also do things like this. So this is the fort at a certain point, and 100 years later, this is what the fort looks like. So this is again, when you flip the page, you see it evolved in time. And then I could show processes. So the whole fort is built in granite, which is found right then and there. There are these giant boulders that just sit, which they used to build the fort. And in certain places, you can see some marks like of how they've broken the stone. So in a comic, I can actually show you the process of how the rocks were split. So again, in a sequential manner, I can show you that first in that boulder, you just basically make small holes. You insert wooden pegs in it. Then you just pour water on it day and night. The wood expands and that splits the rock. So that's how they used to do it. So I could show you stuff like this in a comic. And then, of course, the same fort walls through which the narrator was walking in the beginning, I can reenact some of the important events that happened. This is showing Aurangzeb attacking the fort. And finally, when they breach the walls, this is his troops storming in. It's not necessarily the best drawing, but anyway, this is what I wanted to attempt with comics. So this was Golconda. When I was done with Golconda, I was feeling a little more ambitious. I wanted to take on a full-length project. And I was also, by that time, already quite fascinated with the Indus Valley. I had been living in Ahmedabad for a couple of years, from where I had visited one of the sites, Lothal. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. I had visited Lothal, and I was wondering, when I went to Lothal for the first time, I knew that it's the same time period as the Egyptian pyramids. I knew that this place was alive and kicking when those guys were building pyramids in Egypt. So when I went to Lothal, my first feeling was actually disappointment. It's like, why aren't there pyramids here? And that's kind of what got me curious about the Indus Valley, and I'd been researching about it. So I was already reading about it. And then when I was looking for a topic, I thought this would be a great topic. Because once I started looking for the answers to this question, why are there no pyramids in the Indus Valley? I found that the answers were just absolutely mind-blowing. It made the whole thing so fascinating that I wondered, why don't we know about this already? I keep hearing about Egypt everywhere. Of course, Egypt is visually very stunning. The Indus Valley visually is not as interesting because there's no big pyramids and temples and stuff. But once you scratch the surface just a little bit, you find things absolutely fascinating. So I wanted to write a book on this. So I took on this project. And again, the idea was kind of similar, that there'll be a narrator who takes you around the sites. So this is Mohenjo-daro. And as he takes you around the sites, I also flip back and forth in time. I wanted to imagine what these places look like back in the day. If I was there in 2600 BC, which is almost 5,000 years ago, what would this place look like? So again, I could do this with comics. So this is again a recreation of Mohenjo-daro, one street. And in fact, while I was researching this and while I was drawing this, my research in fact became deeper, because when I had to draw a street scene, I was wondering what would I see in the street. So I thought, okay, there might be some animals. So then I went researching what kinds of animals have been found, like what kind of evidence has been found for animal life in the city. So the research itself became deeper because I was engaging with it through a visual format. This is the Great Bath. So I wanted to show all these things. I wanted to show the dancing girl statue, which apparently is tiny. So again, because it's a visual format, I can just show a hand holding the statue and you kind of get an idea of how big it is, which most people don't. When we see photos, we have no idea how big the statue is. It's tiny. It's like this big. But anyway, I wanted to talk about the writing. I wanted to show people's lives. I wanted to talk about what kinds of houses people lived in. And I want to recreate a family that packs up from a village and moves to the city. And basically answer this question, why the Harappans never built pyramids. That was my main goal. So yeah, so this book came up. And in fact, the answers to this question, just very, very briefly, to why they did not build pyramids is because they apparently did not have kings. They did not have centralization. There was no power sitting in the middle that is basically collecting all the wealth at one spot and therefore being able to pay 50,000 slaves or make 50,000 people build them a pyramid. There was no such thing happening. Power was completely distributed. There was still a lot of hierarchy. There's still rich and poor, but it's much more muted than in other places. Power is distributed, and surprisingly, because power is distributed, for 1,000 years, we have zero evidence for warfare. This thing completely shocked me. I thought it was taken for granted that back in the day, there used to be kings. The way they got power is by beating other people up and stealing all their money. But apparently that's not the case here. And in fact, the Indus Valley, the average person is materially far richer than the average person in Egypt or Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq and stuff. So that completely blew my mind. So that I wanted to capture through this book and tell to a large enough audience that doesn't potentially read textbooks or God forbid, go to excavation reports and read all that, which is what I did. So in Egypt and Mesopotamia, for example, you find tons and tons of artworks that are commemorating victories. You find weapons, you find shields, you find helmets, you find signs of violence in the architecture and amongst the bones and stuff that you find. Here, the only weapons you found are spearheads, but they are so simple that they just could not have been used for war. They're probably just used by security guards or to control animals or something like that. And there's zero depictions of warfare. There's zero evidence of weapons, shields, helmets, nothing. Yeah, so there's several bones that have been analyzed. We cannot tell if it's, I mean, for sure, organized warfare is just completely conspicuous by its absence. Like it's really just not existent. And in fact, it's not just the lack of evidence for warfare, it's all the other things also that correlate. That you see that there's a decentralized power structure and stuff, which I get into a lot more detail in my book. I didn't want to get into too much detail here. But even in the architecture, it's a clear difference. Like in Mesopotamian cities, you see a walled sector that's in the middle. There's the palace, there's the royal tombs. You see clearly the most wealth is there. And then surrounding it is the rest of the people. In Indus cities, if you look at the plan, you find rich houses, poor houses in the same neighborhood spread all over the city. There's no centralized planning. So yeah, there's a lot of evidence potentially you can read in the book. Any question? Yeah, louder.
So there also seems to be a lot of evidence for economic centralization, like the same measures across the whole like length and breadth of the civilization, which was much farther than just the valley. And also like the cities having similar structures again throughout the whole area from Lothal to Harappa and so on. So somehow those two things, contradictory things, persisted together, that there was a lot of economic
So it's not economic centralization,
or central
it's
planning.
economic standardization.
Yeah, or planning or central planning. I mean, you said central planning.
Yeah, but
it was actually
it doesn't look like planning. So for example,
Yeah.
if so what we find is that their basic model is of getting power and riches is through trade. So suppose all of us want to make things and trade with each other. If we keep doing it long enough, we are going to start speaking similar languages. We're going to start probably using similar tools. We're going to have to standardize on how we exchange.
but likely not our cities, right?
Hmm?
We're not going to standardize our cities. The cities were standardized. That to me is a very
Yeah.
It's a puzzle. It's a puzzle.
Yeah.
I think it's a
So,
puzzle that should not be.
There's a lot of theories. I mean, we can discuss it potentially after the talk, and I can tell you what I understand. But we'll maybe stop it here on this topic. But we can feel free to like come up later or during question answers, and we can go into a lot more detail. So yeah. And one of the other things that I wanted to do was I really wanted to compare it to Egypt. So when I make this case for centralized versus decentralized, I also show a lot of artworks from Egypt and Indus Valley to compare how they are different in terms of their quality, their sizes, in terms of how refined they are and so on. So anyway, so these kinds of comparisons and stuff is one of the strengths that I felt of the comics medium that we can do. Yeah, so these are some more pages from the book. I also talk about the end, how the civilization ends, and all the theories about what happens towards the end. Do people come from outside, the so-called Indo-Aryans? Do languages change? What are the theories? What is the evidence we have? So I compare all the evidence and get into detail about what happened afterwards. When the civilization is supposed to have ended. In fact, the new evidence is showing that there's a continuity in urbanism even into the modern historic times. There was never a whole period of complete discontinuity as we used to think. But anyway, so I get into all those details as well. So yeah, so this was the, so yeah, my idea was that one, I'll talk about all these theories, but also kind of give you a sense of being back in time. These two things that I wanted to do in this book, which I've tried with this people of the Indus. So my experience with history, with doing history in comics has been much deeper because I've engaged with it through these two books that I worked on very intensively. For science, on the other hand, I've done very short comics, but on a variety of topics. So the experience has been more broad. The two books that I did on science that are a bit longer, not very long, is 20 pages. The first one is called Mangalyaan, which was about Mangalyaan, a journey to Mars, it's called. This was done for Pratham Books, which is a publisher for younger audiences, for kids. So about like 10 to 11 years old, like that age group. And the second one is called Kickstart Go, which was basically about the petrol engine and how that works. So it was science topics, but for a very lay general audience. It doesn't get into too much detail into the science, but it kind of addresses scientific topics. So these were the two. And then there was a magazine that I wrote this short 3-page comics for, a science comic every month, where I addressed a lot of different topics. One of them, for example, was on the human heart and how it functions. There was another on the theory of relativity, where I was imagining what happens if you actually travel on a beam of light. There was one on the wobble of the Earth's axis itself. So it takes about 20,000 years for the Earth's axis itself to wobble like a top. So there was one comic on that. There was one comic on the plate tectonics and how the Himalayas were formed. So a bunch of different topics. And in doing science through comics, I realized that comics have the power to do a few things. So one, of course, is a kind of a diagrammatic use of visuals, which science already is quite familiar with. We use diagrams a lot, right? So this is a very simple, straightforward diagrammatic kind of illustration. And so is this. So this is from the comic on plate tectonics, of course. But also what comics can do, which I think other mediums don't do so well, is relationships and processes. It can show that really well. So this is one of the pages from the comic on Mangalyaan. And here what I was trying to show was, like, one of the biggest problems when you are sending a satellite to Mars is the distance that you have to travel. It's just so far away that how are you going to do this? So this is one of the things that I wanted to capture. If I'm talking to a 10-year-old, I know I can grab their attention if I tell them this. That is so far away. How would you even travel that far away? So to kind of give an idea of how far away Mars is, I said that imagine if that little thing this woman is holding is the Earth, and in the other hand, she's holding the moon. So she's holding it a few, whatever, 2 feet apart or something. You can see the moon. You kind of get a sense for how far it is. And by showing those 2 little balls, you kind of also get the idea of the difference in sizes. So if this was Earth and if this was moon, where would Mars be? Mars would be somewhere over there, half a kilometer away. So visually, it doesn't tell you exactly the distance, XYZ kilometers or whatever, which to me is not even that interesting. But these relationships to me are interesting. That how far away that is compared to something that I can potentially sense. So this is something that I think comics does really well. This is another one from the same one. So I wanted to, from Mangalyaan. So I wanted to say how the satellite was launched and basically chucked into space where it will go and land on Mars. And the process is called the slingshot maneuver. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. You guys are all science people, so you probably know this better than I do. But anyway, so I wanted to show the slingshot maneuver, and this is something you do with comics. It almost like starts to get like that action. You'll see it in your head. When you see these panels coming in a sequence, you see this action happening in your head. And I use that kind of a thing to explain. And from there, you go to describing the actual way it was done with the satellite and with the satellite being put into larger and larger orbits, picking up speed, and then finally getting a final push and launch to Mars. Yeah. Please don't ask science questions. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So my question is actually about the action shown in the previous one with the,
Yeah.
this one. I mean, did you actually do it yourself? Like, how did you get the action right over here? Like,
What do you
position
mean?
of the palm, you know, how the stance and so on.
Yeah. I just do it. You just have a mirror. This is like the trick for comic book artists. You just have a mirror. And you want whatever expression you want to show, body language, you have to look at it yourself, or you get people around you to do it. That's also another trick. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I can talk about that in the how to make. Yeah. Yeah. You get some minions. So yeah. So anyway, then I wanted to show this path that it doesn't fly directly to Mars. That doesn't make sense. It actually uses gravitational fields to like trace the trajectory. And of course, I also wanted to talk about how precise it has to be to land on this thing precisely. Like if it misses a little bit, if it's too fast by like, I don't know, 1 in 10 to the power 8, like we were talking, it'll just completely miss Mars. So anyway, so these are the kinds of things I want to talk about. And then kind of give a sense for being in space, you know. So this is like where comics becomes fun for me, at least. This is something from the Kickstart Go, the one that talks about petrol engines. So I wanted to, I show like the cover itself is a woman in a sari riding a Royal Enfield. So I thought hopefully that'll attract somebody. Somebody sees that and like, what is this? What is this about? And they'll open it. So from that it started. But to explain what a motorcycle is, I kind of said that it's basically a bicycle, where instead of pedaling with your feet, you have an engine that does the job, that does the pedaling. So that's basically the difference. And the choice of a motorcycle was also because most kids everywhere have seen a motorcycle. Whether you grow up in a city or a village or wherever, you have seen motorcycles. And Pratham Books, the publisher, their their main thing is to take books out to all corners of India and in all languages and make it really affordable. So with that audience in mind, I kind of use these things. I was thinking of a car first. My first idea was actually a bit complex. It was about, it was set in the future where humans are all dead. And there's a museum that's run by insects. So there's an ant who's the museum guide, and he's taking these other insects around and showing them exhibits. And he comes to an exhibit, which is a petrol engine of a car. That was my original idea. So I was going to talk about climate change through that and an engine. And then those guys were like, no, it's too complex. Just can you please just simplify it? So finally, then I thought, okay, a motorcycle might be better because everyone's seen one. So anyway, so this is what I was talking about, that comics can show processes and relationships and stuff like that really well. And that's the strength of comics as a medium to tell science to the wider audience. So here, for example, is a bicycle kind of morphs into a motorcycle almost. And then we kind of go into the engine. I show the engine, I open it up, and then I talk about all the steps in the cycle, the petrol engine cycle. This is just one of the steps. And then I show that this is what happens and it keeps running. And then there's other pages in that where basically then we zoom out. So you start from a motorcycle, you zoom into the engine, and then you zoom out. And this is the last shot where that woman is just driving through this landscape. So this is the kind of stuff that I've done. Here's an example of the comic on the heart. So again, this kind of diagrammatic use of visuals, but also putting them in a sequence to show relationships and steps and processes, but also bringing it down to the human level, which is also, for me at least, while communicating, whether it's history or science or whatever, is to connect it to the human experience. And this one, for example, my idea was that, you know how we say the heart is the seat of all emotion? Like, what does that even mean? We kind of experience it like that. We say heartache, like when we are heartbroken, you know. We say things like that in our language. Must be that we are feeling something around the heart, maybe. So I started with that, but then I go into the actual functioning of the heart, at least as we understand it today, with the way it pumps blood and this and that, and it purifies the blood by sending it to the lungs and so on. So I connected it to this idea of what it means for the heart to ache. I didn't give any answers how those two things are connected. I just raised it as a question and left it. But anyway, so these are finally like this comics can not only show you the diagrams, connect, make relationships, show processes, but it can also bring things down to the human level and potentially connect it to your own life, something you've experienced in your own personal life. So these to me are so those things are to me the strength of this medium. So I'll go briefly over at least how I make comics. It's a very, very short 5-minute tutorial, just so you guys are familiar with what happens behind the scenes. I'm hoping that, and I think Prahlad is also hoping that through these kinds of interactions, potentially some new comics come out about science that go out into the world that can easily communicate to a huge audience what potentially you guys are doing or what has been done already in science and so on. So I thought it might be interesting to familiarize you guys with the process. So the first thing I was going to say was, what are the tools that you need for comics? You basically need a paper, you need a pencil, an eraser, and then a pen. That's literally all you need. Of course, you need first something to say. I'm assuming that's a given. And then you basically need time. So it's a very inexpensive medium. And then once you have those things, at least what I do, people have different methods, but what I do is I write what I'm going to say, what I want to say. This is just an example from the Indus script. In different colors or whatever, I just write, this is what I want to show next to this. And this is very rough at this point. It's not necessarily very precise. It's kind of giving me some structure as to what the comics is going to eventually say and how I'm going to say it along with visuals, which then gets converted into these very, very rough thumbnails. So these are very quickly, roughly drawn thumbnails of what each page is going to look like. It doesn't have any details. It doesn't have all the text. I just say, okay, I want to divide this page into, let's say, 3 panels. I want to show a big, like in this one, for example, I want to show this big map. And in the first 2 panels, I'm going to say this, and here I'm going to say kind of like this. And then I break it down into the whole book into these pages. So I can see kind of how it's looking. I can very easily change things at this stage without any cost at all. So this is the second step that I do, very, very rough thumbnails. And then finally, when you start drawing, you make the drawings, but the drawing itself is a layered process. So a lot of people who are not familiar with comics, for example, and at least this is me before I started making comics, I thought that artists just literally take a page and start from the top left with a pen and then make the final drawing, and then they're done with that page and they move on. But apparently it's not like that. And a lot of new people who want to get into comics get scared because they're like, oh, I can't draw. I don't draw like this. If I draw, it looks much worse. So if I wanted to show this process, that actually this process makes it much, much easier than you think. It's not that hard. So the first thing you do is you take the pencil and you draw, and you have the eraser, so you can keep erasing it and redrawing it, keep doing it over and over until you're happy, more or less happy with what you want. And then you go over it with pen, and then you just erase the pencil. And this is how you make comics. So it's easier than it looks, is all I want to say. And then you add text, which I normally do digitally. So a lot of people do this very differently, but the basic steps are similar. And that's why I feel comics is such a great medium to tell comics, or to tell science, as well as history and all kinds of stories. So that was my agenda with this talk, to kind of give you an idea that this is a good medium that we can potentially use. And yeah, I hope I've done that. So thank you, and we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I know it's a field which is very close to our heart in some way, but we never really ventured to do it as a part of our day-to-day work in the laboratories. Also, partly what you said towards the end, we think that is something which we can't actually do. Namely, we find quite hard when we go out to the students or public at large, try to say what we are doing in the labs and why we think that is something very important for the society at large.
Yeah.
But there is a big barrier that happens is essentially the language, the media, the way we want to bring somewhat complex scientific ideas into kind of a language which people will be able to understand.
Mhm.
So that's how we see that where we fail when we go and try to impress upon people on the street. Students are slightly better. The younger ones are even far better. They are more receptive to what we say by language.
Yeah.
And of course, they get very excited when they see the pictures. So it's not uncommon. Some of our colleagues elsewhere, they probably have done little better than those in the country because we didn't embark on this exciting journey a lot. But you actually introduced us. You actually told us that this is something which we all must be doing as a part of a time that we spend in the lab. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful session with you, and you took us to kind of almost hand-holding and showed us how nice it is to kind of do. So those comments, I request now questions from the audience and also questions from the social media guys who are actually on the YouTube and Zoom. Please go ahead and ask questions. Yeah, I see one. Just hold on.
One quick thing I'll say while you're giving them the mic is that I have noticed, so with my book also, it's not just kids, it's actually a lot of older people who get interested and pick it up because it's in this medium. Like so many people have told me, oh yeah, I've heard of Indus Valley, but I don't know anything about it. I'm probably never going to read a book on it. I'm not that interested also, but in this medium, okay, I'm willing to pick it up. And in fact, I'm noticing that it's a lot of older people who are reading this book and are being more receptive to it because it's in this format. So, yeah.
Hi, really great talk, Nikhil.
Thank you.
So, like, just to give a preface that all of us read Amar Chitrakata or
Yeah.
those things which are like the comics that we would find in order to understand Akbar, Birbal, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So, do you think in the textbooks that there are from medium learning to higher learning, there should be a section for comics? And if yes, there could also be, YouTube also has become like, or videos in general have become a super impressive way of communicating. How easy is it to go take these two textbooks first? And second, how easy is then them to convert to videos,
Mhm.
animations? And how would you do it? Like for your bike,
Yeah.
I saw the bike going, but how do you convert to an animation? How
Yeah.
does it work?
So if it was up to me, I think textbooks would be entirely comics. I have become a total evangelist for comics because I feel the medium is so powerful that it's completely underutilized. But anyway, like, yeah, I do feel that a lot of it should be in comics. And it doesn't have to be in exactly like this kind of comics. It doesn't have to be those boxes and everything. It can be in many different formats. Like, for example, there's web comics now, where basically it's a vertical format because you can keep scrolling down. And again, it uses panels sometimes, but it doesn't have to. It can basically flow in a vertical way or even in a horizontal way. So there are many ways to do it. How and like how do you get people to do it is a completely different question. I don't know if I have answers to that. I can talk about making comics themselves. The one problem I see would be that a comic, or to say the same thing in a comic, might take more pages just because it's a slower whatever. You can cram in more words, but I think that it's a no-brainer because it's more like people are more likely to actually read that thing, or at least kids are. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I used to get these magazines like Champak and all this. I would just immediately skip to the comic section, just read that and then just chuck it and then go play cricket or something afterwards. But and I didn't know about comics. It just happened naturally. So, and I think there's a lot of us that gravitate to this medium because of that reason. Yeah, so in fact, it's interesting because that Kickstart Go, on the petrol engine, I converted all the pages into animations also. So it was very simple animations. So the cycle, for example, you can see the cycle keeps on going. When the woman is riding the motorbike, it's actually very simple animation. So only her hair is going like this, and on the road, the markings on the road seem to be going by. Nothing else is moving, but it looks like she's riding a bike really fast. So animation actually can be done very simply, doesn't necessarily have to be Pixar level or something. And those basic animations themselves can communicate a lot. But the problem with animations or videos is that it's a bit more resource intensive. Whereas comics, on the other hand, like I was trying to make the case, is a really inexpensive medium. You don't need anything. You just potentially need some skill. That's it. And you just need the resources required are minimal. And that's why I think the medium to me is like such a great medium. I don't know if I answered your question.
Worth 1,000 words. Similarly, it appears that it might take 1,000 times more effort to actually come up with a comics for something really interesting. So
Yeah.
do you want to talk about the number of man hours or woman hours required to get something like this
Yeah.
book?
Yeah, it's a lot.
So how
Yeah,
much is
it's a lot. It's a lot of man hours. This one took me 5 years. But if I have to look at full-time effort, it probably took me close to 2 years of full-time effort. So it is quite intensive in that way. But I do feel that my engagement with the topic was 100x deeper. Like I was saying earlier, for me to say the Japanese troops entered Korea, I don't have to think about what the gate looked like, exactly how many troops there were. But for me to illustrate it, I really have to think about all those things. And so, of course, because of that, it takes longer. But I think that my engagement with it is deeper. And therefore, I feel like in a way, it's a little more authentic, maybe in some way, you know. And also that because I'm having to depict it, I feel like I understand it far better than I would if I didn't have to do that.
Right. So my real question is coming up now that suppose somebody wants to do this with a very limited amount of time. Is there some sense of primitives one could use and say, okay, I have these building blocks, I can put them together.
Yeah.
And then do it quickly because I don't have that kind of time to invest in just
Yeah.
making that because there are other things to do. While
Yeah.
you're coming up with the book, I
Yeah.
understand that there's so much research involved. But
Yeah.
here we are quickly trying to get a 15-minute video or a 10-minute read for somebody.
Hmm.
Is there a way to come up with primitives where people could use them and then build them on top, like a library, for example, a code library, something similar to that,
Hmm.
where you could use primitives. Okay, here is a caricature of a person who can do this.
Yeah.
So is there something of that kind?
Yeah, there are tools and stuff, but I haven't really thought about this too much. And also, I feel everyone just does it differently. Everyone has their completely unique ways of communicating. And so, I mean, there are some tools where they give you like a model or whatever, and then you can make it in whatever posture and then trace it out. But I don't think you need that. I feel like you guys have probably read XKCD and stuff. Like even you haven't read this comic XKCD. So even with stick figures, there's a lot you can say. It doesn't have to be very nicely drawn figures. Just the fact that you're using a 2D page to do things and make arrows and show whatever, even with stick figures, you can actually get a lot of emotion in a stick figure. So very simply, you can do it. It's possible, but to start thinking about it in this format, where things can move around and things can happen in that space, there's a lot that you can do with it. But yeah, I haven't really thought about this, if there's some building blocks or not. Also, what you can do if you want to do it quickly is hire a comic book artist.
Yeah, stick figures could be a good starting point.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. So very nice talk. Thank you for that. And like I am a comic book enthusiast myself, so I had a lot of questions. So I'll only ask few. So like, how good were you when you started like drawing comics in the beginning? Like, and how long would it is similar to the previous question, how long would it take for someone from scratch to go to like publishing comics? And I've seen comics from a very basic level, like very simple art to very detailed artwork, like in Japanese manga kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like, how can we make our comics appealing? And,
I mean, I was always drawing as a kid, but I wasn't necessarily good at it. Like I was good at, if I saw something I could copy it and draw it. But if I had to come up with stuff myself, I couldn't do that. So at some point, in fact, this was during my MBA that I started drawing properly. So like if I was trying to draw a face, it would look wonky, some eyes are going somewhere. If I try to draw the same face again, it looks completely different. Or if I'm drawing a person sitting in a chair in a room, it'll look like the chair is floating. So I didn't know like how to do all that. So those perspective and also those basic skills took some time. I spent like the first year just drawing and filling up sketchbooks. So it took some time. This like full length book published or something took me about like 7 years since the day that I started from scratch. The day that I had decided, okay, I'm going to start making comics. So it took a while. So as an art form, of course, and you can keep going forever, you keep working on it, you'll get better and better and better. It takes time, but basic drawings, I think, don't take that much. If you find the right kind of tutorials or something, I think you can do the perspective and the faces, you can simplify them. And that's why I love comics, because some people just literally just draw a circle for a face. And you just, instead of a circle, so one character face is circle, the other character's face is a square. And now no matter how badly you draw a circle or a square, you will not confuse between the two generally. So if two characters are talking over panels, you will know that this is one character and this is the other character. You will not confuse. So there are tricks like that out there. So you can simplify it quite a lot. So I don't have a specific answer to how long it takes, but depends what kind of art you want to make. Yeah.
Are there any more?
Oh, interesting. So I'm working on an app. Yeah. I wish I could show it actually here, but I didn't prepare for it, but I can show you later. It's still comics. So comics basically is visuals, words. It's a reading experience, not a watching experience. You can't just press play and sit back. I didn't want that. So in comics, I want it to be an experience where the reader goes at their own speed and they can go back and forth or whatever. They can take time on a certain page or panel and others, they can read fast. So I like that aspect. But because anyway, things are moving to the screen or whatever, so I'm also starting to put things on a screen. And I also feel like I can get rid of some of the middlemen and I can reach the reader a little more directly. So I'm making an app which is basically comics. For now, it uses the vertical scroll format, and it has a little bit of GIFs. So if there's a bird, it can be flapping its wings or something, or there's a fire, it's just crackling. Very simple. But because it's being put on a device, I'm starting to use the device itself. So the device can do these kinds of things. It can do interactivity. For example, so if I want to tell history and I show something, the image could be tappable. You could tap on things and find out or whatever. And I'm also putting in sound. It's very minimal, not soundtrack. It's very, very minimal ambient sounds just to set a tone so that the focus still remains on reading, but it just sets a mood or sets an ambient kind of a feel. So that's what's next. And it's not history for now. It's actually 2 stories that I'm working on. One is set in Kumaon. It's about Jim Corbett, the guy who went and hunted man-eaters. And the other one is a ghost story. So very different from this stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Listen to question, then decide if it needs to be helped by others. No, all these tech firms are now talking about kind of generative AI, where you talk to a machine and it generates a movie for you.
Yeah.
Presumably something like this is also not too far away, where you kind of
Yeah.
given your own artistic inputs
Yeah.
and it kind of learns to do many of
Yeah.
these things. Are you thinking along those lines at all, or?
No, I'm just pretending like it doesn't exist. Really, because I don't know. It's not, I mean, I want to engage with it, but it's not as interesting to me at the moment.
Sure.
Because my perspective as a creator is a bit different. For me, the creation itself is fun. And the creation itself is something I find a lot of pleasure, not necessarily pleasure, but at least a lot of fulfillment in. So as long as that remains, I will keep doing that. Like, my goal is not just put out a comic and sell it out there. And for that, I might use, let's say, ChatGPT or something. I could literally make it produce a script on the Indus Valley for a comic book or something like that. But then the whole creation part gets lost. Like, for me, it was really fun to go through the excavation reports and look at like pottery fragments. Like, oh, that artwork is really beautiful. So I want that, and I'll put that somewhere in my book. So, and then, oh, this is really cool. Or I have a question and I want to go exploring that. So I go looking for the answers to that. So that process itself is fun. And the process of drawing also is fulfilling. So I feel like I'll miss out on that. But maybe potentially at some point it has to come into the workflow or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, one can imagine that this can actually be a tool which is very useful to do your
Yeah.
more creative things.
Yeah.
We'll see.
No, absolutely. Like, even with Mid-Journey and DALL-E and stuff, which are producing the images, it's actually interesting to give it prompts and make it come up with a bunch of things and then take inspiration from that and like kind of launch from there and come up with a world, for example. If I want to build a world, I could use it to do that. But yeah, right now I'm not really doing it much. Yeah.
So I believe in all these sort of graphic novels you created, you were sort of involved in all aspects of, right from coming up with the conceiving the theme, the script, and illustrations, all aspects.
Yeah.
Every now and then, of course, you did have to consult experts to check that
Yeah.
what you have is right, and possibly in this valley you had an expert join on board.
Yeah.
But this is not necessarily the only way it happens. There is script writing is done by somebody, illustrator.
Yeah.
How different are these sort of processes, and
Yeah.
why did you choose this, the more laborious one than?
Yeah. Why did I choose it? I'm not
Or
really sure,
it
but
could-
it always felt like, yeah, I wanted to do all of it. I just wanted to create the whole thing. People do generally split it up, either because there's a writer who likes comics and can think in terms of comics, but cannot sit down and draw the thing itself panel by panel. So they'll collaborate with an artist. But also it came about because of a need to put out comics faster. And that was like more of this Marvel DC way of doing things, because every few weeks or whatever, they have to put out something. So it can become a pipeline. While this person is writing, you're drawing. And then while you're drawing it, they can start writing the next issue. So it becomes a pipeline. So it produces faster. Some people like to do it that way. I actually wanted to get down into the details and get my hands dirty with everything. In fact, the first book, The Shepherd's Hill, I even self-published it, and I was literally standing outside the fort and selling it also. And I think the learnings were immense because I was standing out there. So when people come up and look at the book, I didn't even know how people look at a book, for example. So I saw that when they look at it, they turn it around. So, okay, so if the cover is important, then the back cover also has to catch them. The cover says, let's say something, the back cover has to say something that adds to it. Okay, so I learned that. And then when they flip through it, I can see which one they're stopping at and looking at it a little more detail, like giving a few more seconds to which illustration and so on. So that learning was insane and immense. And so same with literally working on every single thing. Now I know the whole process. And I think now after 8 years of doing this myself, I'm ready to have a team of 1 or 2 other people with whom I collaborate. And especially with story, for example, I think like telling a story is very difficult. So once you're down into the details, you sort of stop seeing the higher level picture. So you need somebody with whom you can bounce off ideas, and they can maybe see, okay, after these 30 pages, it's kind of getting boring or confusing. So I think we need something here, or this needs to be shortened or expanded. So that kind of help I need, and that kind of work I need. And same with drawings, just because it's such a laborious, time-consuming process to put out detailed drawings, and especially color, for example. So it might be nice to have somebody working with you. And I've also started realizing that when 2 people come together to work, it's not that their skills get added, it's that their skills get multiplied. So I also noticed that, but then you have to find the right people and all that. So yeah, I think I'm ready to have a small team. I'm going in that direction now, in fact. But this also, like, my dad gave me this lesson. So he was telling me about how he became a manager of a bank in some village in India. And the first thing that the manager who was leaving, the first thing that he made my dad do was he made him do all the jobs, including security guard outside, for a week each. And my dad said that after that, when I did become manager, I knew when people were saying things, I could tell, okay, you said that will take you 5 days. I know it doesn't take 5 days because I've done it, And he would be more empathetic also to people that, okay, I know security guard, okay, at this point, this happens. Okay, I see it in the afternoon, it gets a little hard. So that lesson kind of stuck with me, and I was like, okay, for some time, at least for a few years, I want to do all the things, and then we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
More comment to the audience. One of the reasons for actually inviting Nikhil was so that we can provide him themes that can be topics for his potentially not this next comic, but the next ones later on. So
Yeah.
Nikhil is around tomorrow. So if any of you would be interested in meeting him, send me an email and I can arrange a meeting.
Yeah.
And there are
certainly.
books of Nick, the people of the Indus over there. If anyone's interested, can pick it up.
Yeah, they're available for sale, but if you want to just flip through it, also you're welcome to come and do that.
Okay, so I need a couple more of your time. First thing is to express thanks to the speaker by gifting him this particular special memento,
Nice.
Which says 40 years of Asset Colloquium.
Nice.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
wonderful talk.
And it's showing something very historical.
Yes,
This pillar
that
has-
is the icon for Asset.
Oh, okay, lovely.
That is how we
Nice.
try to put that up.
Nice,
So,
thank you.
Yeah, I think as Prahlad said, maybe some of, I'll just put it.
Yeah.
Some of our own work that we do, maybe we can collaborate with you to kind of bring that out into test this where there are many of our colleagues elsewhere does. So maybe that could be a good opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
So-
definitely interested. And like I said, I used to be a science student. That was because I was really into it. And I just left the whole field of engineering and stuff because the work was not inspiring. But science has always been very inspiring to me. So, and I have many different interests, like history is one of them, science, and there's so many things. So I know I'm going to come to this topic at some point, and maybe this is the impetus I needed. Like I was telling Prahlad today, okay, you were getting me really excited about this stuff because we were talking about a lot of also like historical stuff that has happened in India, like history of science, what kinds of advancements and things that have come out of India. So I was getting very excited about that.
Thanks. I also want to take one more minute. As you know, the 40-year celebrations of ASSET actually started from beginning of March. So this is, there are 7 talks that were actually planned in this week, in this month.
See.
So the first talk, incidentally, was actually given by our own Amit Lord, who is actually in the audience. Unfortunately, due to some logistical problems, I couldn't give this memento to you. I request him to come down and accept his memento as well. Thank you, Amit. So in a way, you started the celebrations by giving the first colloquium, and wonderful one. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so that brings to the end of this colloquium. Please join us for a cup of tea at the West Canteen, and that's where we can have even more lively discussion with the speaker. And also, I'm sorry, we have another one tomorrow, a talk by Professor Amit Roy, but that is going to be. You want to say a word or two? Okay, online, but please join, and so this will be very interesting talk as well. So it's online, but I will send the link. Thank you.